Hi, I'm Nicola.
And I'm Julia.
And we're the project leaders from YMCA Malta on the My Voice to Europe project.
My Voice to Europe is an Erasmus Plus project co-funded by the European Union that is being administered through the European Union Programmes Agency.
My Voice to Europe has brought together a group of young people to share their thoughts, ideas, and research on topics that they deemed important for the Maltese Islands.
These young people have developed 13 important themes and produced 13 podcasts with stakeholders, young people, and professionals related to the theme.
Keep watching and engage with the discussion in the comments.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us today to discuss the topic of youth and overconsumption. And maybe starting with Sabela, could you please give an introduction about yourself and why you are here today?
Sure, thank you. So my name is Sabela. I'm a Spanish project coordinator at Friends of the Earth Malta. So yes, I'm joining here today because I think it's a very important topic to talk about. I think it's something that we see every day, kind of. Just everything about overconsumption, people buying, people throwing away stuff. I think it's something that it's very nice that we talk about and see how we can make it a bit better. Thank you.
And you, Michaela?
Hello. First of all, thank you for inviting me on the podcast. So as you know, I'm Michaela and I'm a trainee psychotherapist. And basically I am being part of this podcast as my own entity, and because I'm very passionate about this topic and about sustainability in general. I've seen the impact that it's having on our country and on the planet in general, and I think it's a really great time to start discussing and acting more on the discussions together. So I just wanted to be part of this and have this discussion with you guys.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you so much. So let's begin with a kind of definition. What is overconsumption? Maybe Sabela, you can start.
Sure. I think I would define overconsumption as one of the consequences of our current economic system. So I think because our current system relies completely on consumption and production of goods, then we have the situation where we need to consume and we need to produce in order for the countries to improve their economic growth, which is normally the first thing on their agenda. So then at the end of the day, the consumption and production is not focused on the needs of people, but on, just making more and more money. And then for that, they need to produce and consume more and more. So you come to a situation where you produce more and more to the point where the countries and the planet cannot take it anymore. So at the end of the day, we are producing and consuming more than we can. So in the long term, that obviously doesn't make any sense at all, because we are using more resources than the planet has. So yeah, I think it's a whole consequence of the whole economic system. I think it's also a very complex topic. It has a lot of different variables, and I think that would be my definition.
Michaela, anything to add?
Yes, first of all, I completely agree with Sabela and the fact that it's driven by this need for economic growth all the time. So that's a big driving factor. And basically, kind of in its simplest definition, overconsumption is when we buy more than we need, when we consume more than we need, even on an individual basis. So it's almost like when we enjoy kind of eating too much candy and, too much junk food, it might feel really good. But if we keep doing it, it's going to have a bad impact on our body. This is the same way with the planet. If we keep buying in excess and consuming in excess, there is going to be, and we are seeing a lot of detrimental effects. So as Sabela said, basically, it's producing, consuming, and buying more than the planet can handle and more than we need in reality.
Yeah, 100% agree. And we will focus on that, on kind of how companies and the economy is advertising to us that we should consume more and more. And this kind of, which also ties in with the throwaway culture, how we want to throw away and always buy new things. So yeah, we will expand on that more further in the podcast.
Yeah. And also you mentioned kind of overconsumption on an individual level and like buying too much. So could you expand on that, Michaela, and maybe suggest a few ways in which people contribute to overconsumption commonly?
Yes, of course. Something interesting actually that you just mentioned is the advertising, which I want to comment on as well, because I recently, when I was researching as well, I found out that in the EU alone, the advertising industry spends about 100 billion on advertising per year. And that's basically advertising products, new products, and getting people to want things that they may or may not need at the end of the day. So the advertising has a big impact on people's choices, that's for sure. And yes, on an individual level, you also mentioned the throwaway culture. So this is one way, one very big way that we contribute to overconsumption, basically because there is this idea of convenience. Let me buy this, and once it's finished, once it's useless, I throw it out. It can be in the simplest form. So I'll buy a container that's not reusable and throw it out rather than investing in one that I can kind of reuse all the time. Let me buy this cheap item. It might break in a couple of weeks, but it's fine because I'll throw it out. So this is one way, this kind of convenience and throwaway culture, and doing things a bit mindlessly, then rather than taking the time to think, do I need this item? And if I decide that I do need it, what kind of item will I buy? Will I try to find a more sustainable item that will last longer? Can I buy it secondhand? Can I borrow it before buying it? Sometimes, I think all of us, myself included, we have items that we only use a couple of times a year. So can I borrow it from a friend or a family member a few times a year, or do I really need to own it and have it take up space on my shelf? So all these ways, and the way we live in our homes. Sometimes I think I can go on this topic for the whole hour. But really, it's just the way we live and not being mindful. So even in our own homes, whether it's how we use resources like water, how we use our food. So are we using food in its totality? Or am I cooking and then throwing it away? Kind of not reflecting if we're really using the whole resource um, and getting the most out of it, because I think this is where we need to press on educating each other and society in general, is that each item has its own water and carbon footprint. So when we produce something, a lot of resources were used, like water and non-renewable energy resources, unfortunately, to create a simple item were used. So if that's only used for a week, or we only used part of that item, if it's food, for example, how worth it was it to use this amount of resources to use it for this amount of time? And basically, all of this contributes then to waste generation in landfills and to all the resources of the earth being used up rather quickly. But yes, I don't want to use up too much time on this because I know there's a lot to
We
discuss.
can talk about this more, kind of this our
Yeah.
lifestyle, our modern lifestyle. It's very consumer heavy, as you said, Sibel. And sorry, how do you pronounce it? How do you pronounce your name?
Sabela.
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 So how you said, Sabela, that we overconsume and things like that. Where was I going with this?
But maybe just could you add for now any other ways that people commonly contribute to overconsumption?
Yes, I think we should take a look at different aspects of our normal daily lives, like when it comes to buying clothes, or sorry, because there's some people coming in when I'm recording a podcast. Yeah, so basically the clothes that we buy, like we can have a lot of options when we think about the clothes that we can buy. We can either go to the fast fashion and yeah, just buy everything that we see on the advertisements that is trendy now. We can do that, but we can think about it a bit more, like Michaela, like you mentioned, like put a bit more effort into thinking, do I really need this, or could I get it from another source? Like you can go to a secondhand shop, for example, Or you can go to different initiatives, like in Friends of the Earth, we organize a lot of clothes swaps. So you can exchange the clothes with other people. You don't necessarily have to buy it. I think with the clothes, it's something very, very obvious. Also because right now it's very easy to buy things very fast. So you have in your phone the possibility of buying clothes and getting them to your house. So this is crazy compared to before, because this option of just buying instant stuff, and of course we're being kind of bombarded by advertisements that we should buy things all the time, because otherwise the businesses don't grow. And if we don't buy, they go bankrupt. So there's a big pressure for people to buy all the time. I think even with electronics, it's a similar issue. We need to buy the new phone, the new computer. So I think, yeah, this pressure of just constantly buying is so strong. I think that's mainly how we contribute to it as individuals, right? And yeah, just buying the latest product, or there's always a new need, you know?
So as I was saying, we feel this pressure to always buy new things. And I feel like this mentality of ours really needs to change, and we really need to start changing it. And yeah, that's where I was going. Should we move on to our next question?
Yes. So I think we can move on to that, which you mentioned mentality. So we can go on to question, what can we do on a personal level to combat overconsumption?
Any ideas? Maybe starting from, I don't know, Michaela, sure.
Yes, of course. So basically, it's really important, as I said before, to educate ourselves and kind of um, being a conscious consumer and being more mindful. So the way I found it really easy myself, for example, when I bought a new home, kind of understanding sometimes you need to buy a lot of new items, when you have a new place. When it comes, I categorized when it came, for example, to cleaning products as well. Can I make a sustainable swap? And it's really important to understand that just because there's a sustainable swap doesn't mean that life is any less comfortable, but you kind of get into the habit of researching how I can swap this item, whether it's using something that's refillable, finding a brand that is actually eco-friendly and it's not just advertising itself as eco-friendly. So this is one way to kind of be a bit more mindful, and before buying an item, seeing if it can be kind of swapped out to something sustainable. Then, of course, there's buying less in general, but buying better when actually needing to buy something, so it's more long lasting. Thrifting, as we said before, and aiming on reducing in general, reusing, and in my opinion, we focus a bit too much on recycling. So we kind of fostered this culture of let's buy, and then, recycle the packaging, recycle whatever, but you're still buying a lot. And we still know that recycling isn't the best system. A lot doesn't get recycled. If it does, it can only be recycled up to a couple of times. So I really like kind of focusing on reducing and reusing as the first go-tos. And then, of course, just seeing if you can fix items before throwing away, buying local. And something I'm also very passionate about is food in general, because I know there's a lot of food waste, not just in our country, but in the world in general, and kind of finding creative ways of using the whole item, of cooking in general, because when we cook, we know what we're using. So I know what ingredients I use, I know how much I'm wasting and not. Whereas when I'm buying something, there's a lot of containers, there's a lot of waste that's created. So I think these simple swaps and just being more conscious in general is a really great way to start.
I think that's very important, because also these days we also see a lot of like sustainable swaps, but then you should kind of buy something else instead of using what you already have. And I think that's like
Yes,
very
I love that.
also avoid that trap of like buying something supposedly more sustainable when the more sustainable thing would just to use
Yes.
what you have.
Yes, like I did that personally with my pantry. I was so excited to have this beautiful pantry with all the glass jars, and I bought a few glass jars, and then I realized like the tomato paste that I buy comes in a glass jar. And I realized I can just use that one, clean it, peel off the label, and suddenly all my nuts and whatever were suddenly in these jars, and I stopped buying other glass jars because it was just a useless buy suddenly. And they still match, but they're all glass jars that I repurpose now from my tomato passata buys.
Yeah, that's an amazing way to already use what you have and not buy. And kind of on the topic as well, let's go to greenwashing, because I feel like we touched on that a bit. What do you think about greenwashing? How does it impact us in our everyday life? Maybe starting with Sabela.
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the characteristics of the capitalist system is that there's norm, right? And then everything that becomes an alternative, the system kind of tries to make it a norm, to make it business. So this is what happens with the environment and with feminism and so many trends that at the beginning they are the alternative to the main norm, but then when people realize that it's becoming something trendy, like it will sell more if your product has a green packaging and it says no GMOs, and it's like yeah, green and no I don't know, it looks like a green thing, then it would sell more. So then the companies would sell this product, but then it doesn't mean that it's green, because I think we need to be super careful with that. And even with the companies that maybe they are involved in some kind of I don't know, any kind of business, but then they have this green side of it where they post on Instagram that they do cleanups. So then they look like a green company, but actually I think there's more things to take into account, because I think the process of going green, it's a very deep process. So it's about what materials do you use? How do you take the materials? How much do you pay your workers? From which countries are you taking the materials? How are you selling them? Because if you are involved in any kind of mass production, it cannot be green. So I think sometimes as individuals, it's also very difficult, because there's so many like psychological experts, and like yeah, it's really easy to make us kind of fall into the trick. Yeah, so we have to be super careful with that, also because we don't want this kind of greenwashing initiatives to damage the whole effort that we're doing.
And Michaela, maybe you could add something to that, because like of your psychology background, like
Yes, yes. In fact, the first thing I think of is that I find it really sad, because I think that it disempowers people who are genuinely thinking that they are making a sustainable purchase, and trying to be more sustainable, and they're not realizing that this brand is basically fake advertising. And in fact, I was having this discussion of, but how do you know a brand is fake advertising and they're not sustainable? So it can be as simple as they're using a green color sometimes, just, or as Sabela said, a post on Instagram, whatever. But in general, you start kind of picking up on these things because there's no transparency, and there's no follow through. So as Sabela said, if they just have one rack of clothes that's marked as sustainable, or they did one cleanup, but then their history and their overall practices are just producing too much and using cheap labor, and it's just a way to kind of cover up their unsustainable practices. So I find it sad and disheartening for individuals who are trying to be more sustainable, because then it's easy to be like, I tried, I can't get it right. I try to support this brand. It's not my fault that they're using this kind of marketing strategy and it's too complicated.
We will definitely take this into account in our report, because I feel like legislation can really tackle this. If there were some sort of laws about transparency and how transparent a company should be, that would be really, really great for the environment and the, yeah, overall.
I mean, I think I heard or read something about the EU now including like banned words in advertising, where you cannot write something like unless you have a like scientific claim to back it up on the back. Like you cannot write bio or like these type of things.
Yes. And recently I
Yeah.
read like about the word biodegradable, and it was really interesting because even I fall into this trap. Anyone can technically write biodegradable because even plastic is biodegradable, but after thousands of years, for example. So there's no rule about it. I can get any item and write biodegradable on the packaging. And people will think, okay, great, I'm doing something great. But it's biodegradable in 500 years, for example. And of course, that's not specified.
Yeah, and actually it's very interesting to realize that for the food products, for example, or any product with packaging, it's not obligatory to write what the packaging is made of. So the ingredients you have to write by law, kind of a lot percent. I'm not exactly sure of how much, but like almost everything. But the packaging, you don't need to say how is it made of. So there's like different types for plastic, like different types of plastics that you should write. But then there's also like in the plastic things when you have like this triangle with the arrows and the numbers, that's supposed to say like how easy it is to recycle it, or how difficult, or where do they take it from. But there's also this triangle that is supposed to mean others. So there's a lot of gaps in legislation, as you mentioned, that we don't have the power of knowing what we're buying a lot of times. And even if in the ingredients of things, it's very hard to understand. When you start seeing these numbers, it's super hard for the people to know sometimes if what they're buying is green, or even just to understand what the thing is made of.
And just on the topic of legislation, what has been already done, for example, in Europe and in Malta to kind of help fight overconsumption?
Yeah, and maybe you can also compare it with Spain since you have that experience.
To be honest, I'm more in the critical side of it. So, because there's legislation being done in Malta, in Spain, in the EU, but it's normally to like shift from, like I'm thinking about the energy, for example, to shift from fossil fuels to renewables, but it never tackles the consumption. Like it never tackles how much. Or there was this legislation that we do not give plastic bags for free in the supermarkets, for example. But then we still give plastic bags in exchange for money, and we still use plastic in a lot of things. So I think the legislation normally tackles, like a shift to another thing, but it never tackles the growth. So the economic growth is the issue that we should tackle, in my opinion, because if we keep this amount of economic growth, even if we change the material, it's gonna be the same. Like I'm seeing now a lot of paper cups in the cafes. Like instead of giving you a mug, they give you a paper cup, even if you stay in the cafe. But for a lot of people, that's like, but it's paper, it's not plastic. No, but the problem is not the material. The problem is the amount of material that we are consuming. Because if you give each person that goes to buy a coffee one paper cup, that doesn't solve any problem, even if you're not giving them a plastic cup. So I think in terms of legislation, it should be more tackling the growth. So how to reduce the economic growth and how to make businesses able to sustain themselves and to still get profit, but without having to just keep growing and growing economically.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe going to a more local level, I feel like here in Malta, why people overconsume, and right now there's this trend of kind of buying a lot from Shein, the company. And people kind of get the argument that there are no options in Malta. For example, no sustainable options, no options for people who have a smaller budget. Usually sustainable things are more expensive. Can you comment on that, please?
Starting with Michaela, maybe now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Yes, I was smiling because I think we all know people who shop from Shein. And sometimes I've, complimented people, oh, that's nice. And they just smile and nod now. They're like, okay, don't tell me. They don't tell me anymore where they bought. They
Same.
just do this. They smile and nod. I'm like, okay, I understood. And yes, I do always get the thing, but it's affordable. But yes, and we always get into this back and forth of if it costs €2, how can it cost €2? Like, what's the person being paid? And I always kind of go back with the argument that the cheapest thing is not buying anything sometimes. And checking, as we said before, checking with yourself if you really need the item in the first place. Because this is the thing, when things are so cheap, it's easy to buy more. So if I just need this, it's easy to buy 5 of them because they're so cheap, and then just have 4 extra ones. So that's a big discussion. But in general, I really feel that as a country, we need to support local businesses, whether it's related even to food production, so local suppliers of food items and fashion and everything. So of course, if they're buying their raw materials at a more expensive rate because they're more sustainable and they're sourcing their raw materials sustainably, then they are selling it at a higher price. So I understand that. And I know it's not because they want, of course, they need to make a living, so they want the profit margin as they deserve, especially if this is their livelihood and they want to make their sustainable business their livelihood. So I really think that we need to, as a country, support these businesses to be able to keep their prices as affordable as possible, and have them in shops in general, not just in specific places, kind of exiled from the bigger areas, bigger shops, bigger shopping malls, but have the sustainable item. And unfortunately, we have many unsustainable items next to each other, so people can easily grab the sustainable one, have it be capped at a similar price, so people can say, okay, it's not that much more, and in the long run it can last more, it's better for me. These small things, and education in general. So as I said before, I really feel as a country we focused a bit too much on recycling, and we had this whole movement on telling people to recycle, but we did not, as Sabela said, focus on the root cause of overproducing. And I think that in general is very important to educate people that every item we buy, it needed resources to be created. It had its own footprint. So what we do as consumers, what we buy as consumers, has a big impact in general.
Yeah, something I want to mention again, you said this, both of you mentioned that there's no kind of on a product, there's no background on its packaging, for example. I feel like even going back to our report that we will have to write in the future about this, we can also propose that there should be some kind of legislation made that on every item there should be written how much kind of energy it consumed to make every item. Because I hear about this on social media, but I never see it in person on my item of clothing. So I feel that would make people more mindful when they see it. They'll be like, oh damn, that took 3 liters of water to make this one single item. Yeah.
I think me quite interested in like fast fashion and stuff, but I think I read once in a book, I hope I don't misquote it, but that it takes about actually 2,000 liters of water to produce a single pair of jeans, from growing all the cotton and then like processing it, dyeing it, and all of that. So I think it's like really, and I mean, actually the fast fashion, or actually the total fashion industry, is the second most polluting industry in the world, even produces more carbon dioxide than like commercial and what do you call it, like cargo flying.
Yes, and flights and everything all put together, fast fashion produces more,
We can
unfortunately.
see that, like, and it's overconsumption because of its of clothes, and we can see how much of a significant impact it does have. And I think
Yeah.
it's important to recognize it.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to mention here besides the fast fashion, like obviously it's very important, but I think there's also other things that we should think about, like the consumption of meat. It's one of the biggest, like the biggest issues that we have, because there's so much like so much territory, so much land that needs to be just used for monocultures and to plant like soya, corn, so the animals can eat. And then also the land that you need to put the animals in, and then the factories that you need to process the meat, and then all the meat that people consume and consume, like without also about when you were mentioning before, like the gap between the product that you have and all the process that it came from. It's so big, it's very really very hard to know that when you buy a burger in, well, anywhere with meat, all the process that came before that, and all the water, all the crops, all the fertilizers to for the land. So I think it's also like it's such a big scale that is impressive. And then we go back to the needs. I think like it's not something that we need, because there's a lot of societies in our planet that don't eat meat, and they don't. I mean, there's a lot of meats, obviously, like with dairy as well. A lot of meats created by business people that wanted to make profit. But yeah, if we focus on the need, we don't really need to have all this land used just to feed animals that then we process and then we buy. So yeah, I think this is also like, as Friends of the Earth Malta, we're very focused on this issue as well. Like we are mainly vegetarian. I am personally vegan because I don't want to contribute to the whole system of meat production. And even with fish, I think it's very important, being on an island here, to know where is it coming from. Because I know that sometimes it's very important for a culture to consume the animals that are available. In this case, there's a lot of fish, I'm aware, but it's also important to know, like, okay, do I buy it from the tuna farm, or do I buy it from a local, more local and sustainable source? So like the questions that Michaela also mentioned before, when you're about to buy, it's very important to realize which choice am I gonna make.
Yeah.
Mm,
And
yeah.
this thing of local buying, I feel it should be more advertised, honestly. And also, it should maybe become trendy again, because many just go to their supermarket rather than wait for the farmer's market that will be on a Saturday, which is quite a shame.
But if I may quickly disagree with you,
Absolutely,
just
yeah.
but I think we also see this trend, like at least, for example, in other countries as well, with the local businesses like becoming trendy again or something. But then once again, as Sabela mentioned before, like how like for example, the sustainability and feminism were turned into a product. So then again, that shop local gets turned into a product where it disguises it, and it's still like a mass-produced product. It just tries to hide that it's local in the end.
Okay, I see
Yeah.
what you mean. Maybe you can comment on this.
Yes.
Michaela, yeah, you can go ahead.
Yes. I think I really find it important for this reason to start placing more pressure and more responsibility on the businesses, not just on the consumers. Because even from this discussion alone, we can see how complicated and how complicated basically it can get for people, and confusing, that's the word, it can get for consumers. So if you're tired after a long day and just went to buy, going to buy something to cook, it's very confusing if you it's not clearly written. And yes, people are used to going for convenience. I'm used to buying this, so I'll just grab this packet, I know it's good, and I'll cook this. But if everything is clearly written, then we can, pause and say, okay, it's right in front of me, the 5,000 liters of water, the 20 liters of water, and easy to compare. So I completely believe and really want to empower people through this podcast that our own actions have a big impact, but I really believe that it's time as well to place more responsibility on the businesses themselves, because it's not fair to have everything so misleading, so confusing, so shady. And I feel like we're in a maze trying to figure out what's sustainable and what's best to do. And everyone's trying to kind of keep us in the dark and keep moving everything um, to not find it. Of course, as we said in the beginning, for the benefit of economic growth. And so the business owners can kind of stay comfortable in what they're used to doing, mass producing, using cheap labor, and not, they need to learn to be a bit uncomfortable and get used to something new until it will also become comfortable for them eventually. So it will be fine. They just need to be pushed into it at this point.
And I mean, you mentioned this comfort or the system we're used to. How effective do you think it would be, for example, to have a circular economy? And could you before define what a circular economy is? Maybe Sabela starting this time.
Sure. Yeah, I think we can have two options for an economic model. We have a linear model now, which is basically something is produced, so you need certain materials to produce it, then something is sold, people buy it, and then it goes to waste. We have the option of recycling, but however, it's important not to put all the focus in there, like Michaela said, because actually the products are not made to be recycled. So this is where circular economy comes in. So circular economy is kind of a model where you can imagine it as a circle, and it starts with creating products that can and are going to be recycled. So the idea, I think what makes sense for me, is that the products are made to be recycled. And they are produced, you need the materials, they are sold, and then after they're used, you use them again. So the products have more than one life because they are made and thought from the beginning to have more lives. It can be in different shapes, like it doesn't necessarily have to be, let's say I make a bottle and then it's a bottle. It can be created in a way that the materials are easily teared apart. So you can, because in a lot of cases right now, the products are made of a mix of materials and it's very hard to recycle. But if the products are created in a way that you can separate the materials and use them for something new, then you would reduce the waste, which would solve a lot of problems like global carbon emissions. It would help for climate change. I don't know, it's just about the thinking. It's a big shift also. But yeah, it would also save us so much money if we didn't have to buy things all the time.
Yeah.
But then again, it's the pressure that we should put in governments and on businesses to go towards this model, because right now they're benefiting so much from this linear economic model that they don't even care. But for us, it would be very beneficial, I think, and for the nature, because right now we're using so many resources that we're ending them all. So if we don't need so many resources because we're really reusing and reusing,
Yes.
I think it's a good model to think about.
Michaela, anything to add?
Yeah, what I want to add on that, what Sabela just said about the resources we're using, and something that I'm not sure how many people are aware of it. It's something I've been following for the past few years. It's Earth Overshoot Day. So basically what Earth Overshoot Day is, it's the day. So basically, in an ideal world, we use the amount of resources that we need for a year are used in a whole year. So we use them up on the 31st of December. However, what's happening, because of the overconsumption, is that we are using more resources than the world actually has to offer. So, for example, last year, Earth Overshoots Day fell, I think on 3rd August it was. This year, it's being calculated that it will fall around 24 July, but it's not confirmed because we're still not there yet. So basically what that means is that after 24 July or whenever it will fall, we are using more resources than the planet can handle. So it's like we're acting like we have 1.5 to 1.75 planets, basically. And the idea is that we have to live within our means. Realistically, we have one planet, and it's like I want this to last 3 hours and I drink it in an hour, basically. And then I have nothing for the other two. And that's basically what we're doing. It started being tracked in the 70s, it was kind of backtracked, and each year it's kind of getting worse, apart from a couple of years. So this is really something to think about. And it's kind of a day to sit and say, okay, from today on, we're using more resources than we can handle. So that's very important, I think, to reflect on. And something else about the circular economy is I think that it starts very well when we think about children's items. We see that, especially infants and toddlers, there is this idea of circular economy. So in clothes, there's like this elastic waste, so they can grow with them and not, one size is thrown away, because they know it's a hassle for parents to buy so many clothes. Toddlers' beds, they go from like this nursery bed, sometimes to a bed they can sleep on when they're toddlers, to a bed they can sleep on when they're grown up. Sometimes it shifts into a desk. So parents buy one item and it shifts into 3, 4 items as the kid grows older. So it's actually there at one point in certain niches. But then, of course, we want people to buy as they grow older, and kids cannot buy their own stuff. So as we grow older, we find things, as Sabela said, you have one purpose for it, and when that purpose is done, it's thrown away in a linear model, and we lose the circularity, which is the ideal way.
Yeah, and I think I would like to add into that then I think we should remember that consumption is not equal. So we don't all consume the same, and we cannot all afford to consume the same. So yeah, I read, I think, this thing that if we all lived like an average person from Germany, the emissions of the planet would double. So I think it's also important to consider that a lot of us, we are in this position of privilege where we can afford to consume as much as we can, right? We can live, we can just buy a yacht if we have enough money. Like, I don't know, I think it's important to reflect on our position of privilege and think that this is not available for everyone. And if we all want to live in this planet, and as you said, Michaela, not like exhausting the resources, so in a way that we need more planets, we should also think, like, is it fair that just because I'm earning more money, I'm spending all this money when there's people that cannot even have a meal a day? And obviously businesses also benefit from this. So yeah, just like a note to keep in mind.
Yeah, I always think about this when I kind of go on social media and I follow celebrities, right? And they're usually in the higher tax bracket than us, you know? And I always see them like they have 3 cars, 5,000 bags, 3,000 items of clothing. It's really a shame. And then kind of us, we look at them thinking, oh, we should also have that too. I should also aim to have more money to buy more things. And it really is a shame.
And just to kind of, because we do need to come to some sort of like definite conclusion as for our project, as we're presenting your and as well as our ideas to these candidates for the European Parliament. So
Elections.
yeah, candidates for European Parliament. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
So could you think of any like precise legislation that you think should be put in place to tackle overconsumption? Michaela, do you want to start?
Yes, there are many. I think if I focus on our country specifically, it applies to many, but I really feel like we struggle to collaborate with the right stakeholders before making decisions. So people in power do not really collaborate with the right stakeholders. For example, when it comes to infrastructure, to our roads. So much money is spent on creating new roads, new flyovers, new whatever. But then we also always have the discussion, how safe is it for bikes, people who want to use bikes. So people who want to try a more eco-friendly means of transport and do not feel safe to do so in their own country. And public transport as well. Basically, we are either I'm not sure if we've already met it, but basically there are more private cars than there are people in Malta, or we're close to getting there. So it's bigger than the population, the amount of cars that there are on the island. I also have my own private car because when I am abroad, unfortunately, I find it very easy to use public transport. But depending on where you work and on your schedule, it can be very challenging to keep up with public transport in Malta. And I feel this really needs to be tackled because we live on a small, flat island where we can use so many different means of transport. And I'd really like to see that change. And in general, just stronger legislations when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to the materials being used. We see people, both local, foreign here, that are really innovative, creating innovative materials that can be used in infrastructure. But how much are we implementing and enforcing the people to actually buy from these sustainable suppliers? What are the rules? I know France enforces more on green roofs and on food waste. There are stricter laws. So I think it's time to kind of push for stricter legislation on different fronts. So people will just, in reality, have to start changing rather than having it as an option kind of on paper, but not really enforced in daily life.
Yeah, I would also like to add a bit to that, because as we mentioned before, this concept of ecological footprint, right? That like we are using more planets than we actually have. I think it would be nice if the EU had also this measure as something that should be implemented or must be implemented by the different businesses and companies across the European Union. Like if we had a way of measuring the European footprint in all the ways, like I don't know, considering more the needs of the people in the EU and less the profit of the businesses here, and considering a lot of things that are not being considered in the price of things, like when you buy an apple from, or I don't know, an avocado from Chile, you're not, like, it's not being considered the amount of emissions that went on the transport. So I think there's a lot of things that in the EU we could do. Yeah, like adding to the cost of things, maybe, well, if it comes from New Zealand, do we need to have products from New Zealand? Like kind of thinking a bit more of what people need, because if we already have certain products here, why do we need to bring them from somewhere else? And what is the footprint of the European Union right now, bringing all these products and making them available for people? Like, what's the ecological footprint of the European Union with all the flights within, like inside the EU? I think there's so many things that we already have the tools to analyze. Like we already have the tools to see how this is impacting the climate. So why are we not doing it? We're just kind of giving the choice of buying all the products that we want and as much as we want. But I think we could do more about it. Like, I don't know, if you have 7 houses, should you be allowed to have 8 houses? I don't know. I think we could do a bit more about that from the EU level, and evaluating the needs of the people, I would say, more than just focusing on profit and economic agreements with other countries if we don't need those things.
I guess, yeah, that's a good way to finish off. Thank you so much for being here. Unless you want to mention anything else?
I think we all could go on for ages
Yes.
It is a never ending.
about this topic,
Yeah.
but I really enjoyed this. Yeah.
Same. Thank you for organizing, and I hope you enjoy also the process and writing your report. I would like to read it when it's done.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your input. It was very professional and very, very interesting points.
Yes, and thank you for that, like I forgot what was called exactly, but that like Earth Overload Day, I think that was very
Yeah.
eye-opening. It's not something I had heard before.
Neither have I.
And like it was really kind of shocking to know that like we're using all those materials in like a bit more than half a year.
Exactly.
Thank you for watching our podcast. We hope you found it fruitful. So, what are we going to do with these podcasts?
On the 11th of May at the Valletta Design Cluster, our young people will be sharing the results of these podcasts and the research around the project to our guests, which will include MEPs and MEP candidates of the upcoming election.
Join us on the 11th of May at the Valletta Design Cluster by registering through the link on this post or by contacting us on info@ymcamalta.org.
See you there.